In today's video, I'm going to show you how to adapt color schemes by painting this Boba Fett T'au Pathfinder.
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible to each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the channel, collectors. So with the recent conclusion of Book of Boba Fett, I was really inspired by the Boba Fett color scheme. I thought, what better way to show my interest other than to adapt the Boba Fett color scheme onto the T'au Pathfinders, which I will be painting for my girlfriend to play Kill Team with. Fundamentally, there are a few concepts that you should apply when trying to adapt a color scheme, whether is it from a known cartoon character or a very well established live action movie character. So without further ado, I'm just going to talk about some of the tips that I use when adapting this color scheme onto the miniature. So first and foremost, the most important thing when adapting color schemes would be proportion. Sometimes some characters can have really complex color schemes, which make it very hard to adapt. However, what you need to do is to boil down these color schemes to about 3 to 4 colors maximum. So say for example, when we have Captain America, we have skin color, blue, red and white, therefore 4 colors. Let's say for Wolverine, we have blue, yellow, skin color, maybe a bit of black, 4 colors. This is fundamentally what makes color schemes iconic and identifiable to the viewer. The second concept that I'm going to apply is placement. Other than the proportion of color schemes, we need to remember the placements that make them iconic. Certain characters have very iconic color schemes, but to add on to that would be the placements. So say for example Buzz Lightyear, you remember that his armor is mostly white. However, another key characteristic of its look would be his green wings that you will never ever miss. So similarly with the Boba Fett armor, placement is also very important because he has a green helmet, but what's more important is that he has yellow shoulder plates as well as red leather looking like greaves where he launches his flamethrower from. So other than proportions, these placements make the colors on the characters look that much more iconic. So lastly, it will be the context of how you use the colors. So for Boba Fett, where most of the colors are on his armor, I'm going to be placing these colors onto the T'au Pathfinder. Very fortunately, he has almost exactly the same armor panels that Boba Fett has, so which makes this job so much easier. So without further ado, let's get painting my Boba Fett T'au Pathfinders right now. So the first stage would be the proportion. So as I mentioned, the first concept is proportion and color selection. So I brought down Boba Fett's armor to a few colors, namely the green, the yellow, the red, and more or less the black Tusken Raider robes that he's wearing. So these are the main colors that I'll be using. So for this stage, I'll be breaking down the proportions, and these are the colors from AK that I'll be using. Alternatively, these Games Workshop colors will work just fine. So let's get out all these colors and let's get breaking down the proportion of the Boba Fett armor right now.
Alright, so first up we're going to be using medium flash and I'm just going to be blocking out the yellow areas. So as I talked about proportion, we should analyze the kind of colors that Boba Fett fundamentally uses. On this scheme, I would say his armor is predominantly black and we just have to block out the armor panels. So I would say the green armor panel takes up the biggest area, so we just have to make sure that we consciously spend more time on the green armor panels. And yeah, the next other colors are red and yellow, which are sort of like the complementary colors. Okay, so next up we are going to be painting in the red area. I'm going to be using medium rust to block in those areas. So as you can see, the T'au Pathfinder has already been base coated. We've done this with an airbrush and the color that I've used is AK Gen 3 dark green. So just blocking out the proportions, I think at this point of time, I'm also very consciously thinking about placement. Because not only the proportions are important, but where the colors are allows the character to be, well, more identifiable. So the bottom portion of Boba Fett armor is covered in his black Tusken Raider robes. So I'm going to be using Grim Brown here. As you can see, if you have placed the proportions and you have placed the colors accordingly, it already starts to identify as the very iconic Boba Fett look. I know that the base colors don't really reflect the final colors, but I just have to trust the process because we're going to be painting him on a red Martian Earth, and that's why all the colors that I've selected tend to move towards, well, a more reddish tone. And now next, I'm going to be painting the skin on the T'au Pathfinder. And this is something that I have done consciously because the T'au Fire Clan tends to have blue skin, and I didn't want to deviate too much away from the Warhammer 40k lore.
So after we've done the proportion planning, the next most important thing to do is to make sure that every single detail is well defined. So usually I do this stage with an enamel wash. However, if you don't have an enamel wash, that's okay. You can always use some of the Games Workshop washes, as you can see right here. So without further ado, let's get washing and defining our model right now.
Alright, okay, so next I'm just gonna be coating all my T'au Pathfinders in this brown enamel wash. This is going to help me define all the nooks and crannies and allow the figurine to have its components well defined.
So now with the proportions all planned out, I'm going to make this armor look more like Boba Fett's armor right now. So right here, we're going to be focusing on the green armor, and these are the colors that I'll be using. Alternatively, these Games Workshop colors will work just fine. So let's gather up all these colors and let's get painting the green armor on this T'au Pathfinder right now.
Alright, so here comes the fun part. We're going to be placing in the initial highlights. So for the initial highlights, I'm paying particular attention to the shape of the highlights. I will be covering this topic in greater detail in one of the future videos, which I'll be painting a Tyranid Genestealer cult model. So you don't want to miss this out. However, just in short, I'm breaking down the highlight shapes and I'm not painting according to the model. Okay, moving on, adding in a little bit of dark green with a little bit of green sky. This forms sort of like the mid-tone highlight. Okay, so usually when I highlight the models, I tend to break down highlights into several stages. At this point of time, because this is sort of like a higher value, I'm also taking the opportunity to place in some of the forms that you might miss in the shadows by just sort of adding in a little bit of a slight edge highlight with a little bit of shape language there. And this allows me to illustrate that the armor is popping up from the T'au Pathfinder's chest. Moving on, I'm adding in a little bit of sand yellow into the green sky. What this does is it tints the green sky slightly towards yellow and gives it a higher temperature while increasing the value. Why I'm doing this is because I'm illustrating that this model would be standing in this red Martian rock earth kind of planet, and what happens there is I envision that the environment tends to be very hot, and because of that I'm increasing the color temperature to illustrate this point.
So another iconic color on Boba Fett will be the bright red color on his armor. For this stage, I'll be using these colors right here. Alternatively, these colors will work just fine from Games Workshop. So let's gather up all these colors and let's get painting the red armor panels right now.
Alright, so now we're gonna be painting in the red areas. As you know, it has already been base coated in medium rust. I'm using matte red here to establish a little bit of the mid-tones. So as you can see, in my new painting ideology, I kind of just start from a very saturated mid-tone. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to be just identifying the planes that are exposed to the lights. So like say for example this comm set that is on his head, where the skinny plane is exposed to the light, I just entirely paint it in matte red first without considering any of the shape languages. Moving on, adding in a little bit of sunny skin tone into the matte red. This creates sort of like a soft highlight, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be adding in little bits, especially on the areas that are exposed to light. Where the faces are not exposed to light, I'm a little bit more reserved with the highlighting, just so that I do not over highlight and overcomplicate the entire piece. Next up, adding in a little bit of luminous flash into the mix. As you can see, this is slightly desaturated. This is only reserved for the highest highlights and communicating the sheen and shine of certain areas. At this point of time, I want to bring your attention that because when working with red, you don't want to make these areas too large.
Here we're going to make a slight deviation from Boba Fett, because unlike Boba Fett, T'au Pathfinders have blue skin, and this is where things get a little bit tricky. Because we have to integrate this blue skin into the color scheme, it kind of makes Boba Fett look like Cat Bane in Boba Fett armor. But what the hell, let's just do it anyway. These are the colors that I'll be using. Alternatively, these colors will work just fine. So let's gather up all these colors and let's get painting the blue skin on the T'au Pathfinder right now.
Alright, so now using a little bit of dark blue grey, this is going to be the initial highlight for the T'au face. At this point in time, because the face is going to be the central highlight of the model, I'm going to be very careful with the shapes that I'm choosing. Most importantly, we have to recognize that the T'au's face is kind of roundish without a nose, so that's why I'm trying to paint in the shapes to illustrate and communicate this point. Secondly, adding in a little bit of green sky. The green sky is slightly warmer than the dark blue grey, therefore I've chosen this color to increase the value and place in the highlights. At this point in time, this color will be used to define a lot of the sharper features. And yeah, as you can see, the round head on the front is not on the model. And it's always good to have a look around at the model just to see, make sure that it's fine before moving on to the next stage.
So up next, we're going to be painting the black Tusken Raider robes on Boba Fett's new iconic look from the Book of Boba Fett. So for this stage, I'll be using these colors right here. Alternatively, these colors will work just fine. Let's gather up all these colors. Let's get painting the Tusken Raider robes on the model right now.
Okay, so now we have base coated the entire Tusken robes in green brown. We're going to be starting to create some initial highlights using rubber black and a little bit of dark blue grey. So why I've done the green brown base coat is I want to contrast the colors. By creating a color temperature contrast, what you inevitably are doing is that you have created a very deep tone that contrasts against the mid-tone. And you don't really need to go down to like black to create an absolute black, because the dynamic range of the contrast is pretty high now. Adding in a little bit of green sky, and this is going to be some of the highlights. At this point in time, you must take note that we are highlighting something that is a bit more matte. So therefore, I'm not going into like extreme highlights, just picking out the shapes, picking out the areas that illustrate that this is some folds on the materials. Moving on, I'm adding in a little bit of luminous flash, and this is going to be very selectively placed on the model. As you can see, my placements are limited to just little lines and little dots to highlight the crests and highlight the trolls of the folds on this material right here.
Similarly, with the black Tusken Raider robes, we're going to use the same colors for the black NMM, except that the placements are going to be slightly different. So for this stage, I'll be using these colors right here. Alternatively, these colors will work just fine. So let's gather up all these colors and let's get painting the black non-metallic metal right now.
Okay, now this is something a little bit different. So we are also going to be painting black, but how is this differing from the previous stage is because this is a high shine material. I'm going to be highlighting some of the areas up to a very high value. Secondly, I'm also going to differ this color to make it slightly more blue. In a sense, because it is reflecting the sky, I'm going to try to make this a little bit more colder in temperature. So adding in a little bit of dark blue grey here. While we all start from the same base coat, I'm going to make sure that the highlights are a little bit thicker and a little bit bolder for the gun itself. So adding in a little bit of luminous flash. While as you can see, the colors are pretty similar. The proportions of the placements differ quite vastly. The style of highlighting is also very different. As you can see, very large bold highlights.
So I've saved the best for last because yellow is a color that's going to be dirty very easily. So we're going to paint the yellow shoulder pads as well as the knee pads on Boba Fett's armor. So for this stage, I'll be using these colors right here. Alternatively, these colors will work just fine. So let's gather up all these colors. Let's get painting the yellow armor panels on Boba Fett's armor right now.
Okay, so now adding in a little bit of sand yellow and deep yellow, we're going to start to highlight the knee pads. These are the points. Because they are bright yellow, I'm going to be only focusing on the areas that are directly facing the light. If they're not facing the light, tend to keep them in their original color, and just to create some kind of contrast right here. So adding in a little bit of luminous flash. As you can see, AK Generation 3 has very good coverage, and this coverage is extremely good when you're painting yellow. Trust me, if you go with a different brand, it's gonna be quite tough.
Okay, moving on from the yellow armor panels, we are going to go on to the red leather greaves and the belt, as well as the ammo pouch that this T'au Pathfinder is carrying. So these are the colors that I'll be using. Alternatively, these colors will work just fine. So let's gather up all these colors and let's get painting all the leather elements on this T'au Pathfinder right now.
Okay, so now we're going to be painting the greaves. Right here, I'm going to be using medium rust mixed in with a little bit of light brown. This point of time, these leather areas tend to be matte and pretty low value. So what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be placing just the midtones and not highlighting them to an extreme level. So this is another iconic color on Boba Fett's armor. So next up, adding in a little bit of radiant flash. As you can see, the value is slightly raised. I'm just going to be picking on some of the faces that are facing the light, and really at this point of time you don't want to do too much. Always remember the concept, less is more. And for matte surfaces, that is particularly relevant. Alright, now let's just have a quick look to make sure that the entire model is looking coherent, and we can move on to the final stage.
Last but not least, because this is the leader of the T'au Pathfinder Q team, we're going to paint up the holographic display which is reading the data from. For this stage, we're going to utilize some contrast paint because it's the fastest way to get this ethereal looking effect, and these are the colors that I'll be using. So let's gather up all these colors and let's get painting the holographic display right now.
Okay, so now we're going to just paint in the comms holographic display. Going to be using pastel blue here. It's just going to be a light base coat and going to be some contrast on it, because I find that this is pretty effective in showcasing the holographic look on the model. As you can see, the areas that are popped out really look like just energy being displayed to the Tau commander, and he is ready for the tabletop.
So there we have it. This is the final review of how I adapted the Boba Fett armor color scheme onto the T'au Pathfinders. What do you think? I hope you really liked it. So those were some very useful tips which I used to adapt color schemes from different characters which might not be in the Warhammer universe into my paint schemes. I hope you found this video useful, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, why not hit the like and subscribe, because it really helps to tell YouTube you want to see more videos such as these. And if you want to support the channel even further or even more directly, head on to Patreon and become a patron. Every single dollar that goes into the Patreon comes back into producing videos such as these. I'd like to thank you all for watching all the way to the end, and I hope to see you in the next painting video. See you!